Hello and welcome to Talking Templars. I'm Tony McMahon.
And I'm Dr. Steve Tibble.
And I'm, I suppose, a TV historian and author. I'm fascinated by both the, if you want, mainstream account of the Templars, but I do dabble in conspiratorial waters. What about you, Steve?
Well, I'd take the opposite side, really. I come from the academic side of things. I write about the Templars and the other military orders and the assassins, but very much from a historical, evidence-based set of sources.
So you'll be horrified by what we're going to do today, because we're going to look at the origins of the Knights Templar, where we have the account from medieval chroniclers, but we'll be looking at whether or not that factual account can be fully trusted. But then, of course, we also have some pretty far out stuff which we're going to smoke on that as well. So, but why don't we start with those? Why don't we start with what we know about the Templars, these 9 knights who set up something called the Knights Templar. It's 20 years into the Crusades. Jerusalem was taken, in 1099. 20 years later, something has gone wrong, has it? That's led to the Knights Templar, this new concept of a knighthood being set up. So what exactly has happened?
Yeah, you're right, Tony. Something went wrong. Arguably, something was always wrong. You know, the First Crusade recovered Jerusalem, 1099, in a very bloodthirsty way. Most of the guys who'd travelled all the way over from Europe to do the crusade, they'd spent years on the road. A lot of them had died. The guys who got there were veterans, but they were exhausted. And most of them, literally most of them, then said, fantastic, great job, lads. Let's go home. Haven't seen the wife and kids for literally years. And so most of the crusade just dissolved, which is fine. If you think of a crusade as a violent pilgrimage, then sure, you go home, it's job done. But if you want to defend Christendom and retain Jerusalem and the other holy places, you need people who are out there fighting for it, and you need something that's a bit like a standing army. And these were, shockingly sort of, outrageous ideas at the time. People didn't have standing armies, and they certainly didn't have them thousands of miles away from Western Europe. So the idea of having a quasi-religious, quasi-military force was pretty much there in the background from the beginning, because the problem was there from the beginning. And you do find in the Crusader states, you get these confraternities that have kind of religious connotations, like, for instance, there's one up in Antioch called the Confraternity of St. Peter, and they do great work in, a few battles, and then they're wheeled out for the Battle of Aga Sanguinis, which is, great name, the field of blood, and you can see where that's going. They just get wiped out. No one ever hears of them again. So the idea of these proto-military orders is pretty much always out there, because the need is always out there.
Just a quick Templar ad break here to tell you all about Dr. Steve Tibble's book, Crusader Criminals, all about those who went a little bit rogue in the Holy Land, the interplay between criminality and crusading, some of the larger-than-life characters who did some very wicked and evil things on crusade. So get your copy at Amazon, Waterstones, and other outlets. So we've got these Christian crusaders. They've carved out these territories in the Middle East, on the eastern Mediterranean seaboard. They're always having a bit of trouble holding on to them. I mean, they lose Edessa pretty early on. And then this, as you say, this idea of a Christian knighthood arises. But it's not universally welcome. Not everybody says, oh, that's a jolly good idea. Now, we know Bernard of Clairvaux, Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, as he will become, is a big champion of this. He calls it the new knighthood. He says, yeah, it wasn't a great idea. We've got these guys, they're kind of like, they're warriors, they're monks, they're there all the time. They've sworn off women. They've sworn off the booze. They don't gamble.
They don't even bathe.
They don't even bathe. They're marvelous, and they all dress the same as well. They've got no individuality, which is fantastic. They kind of they give everything to the hive, as it were. But you do have other voices. There's a guy I know, Isaac of Stella, who's another Cistercian monk. who basically says, no, this is appalling. This has got nothing to do with Christianity. Some people even, I think I'm right in saying towards the beginning, even suggesting this could smacks a bit of Islamic jihadi. It's not quite. It's certainly not Christian anyway. I mean, there's nowhere in the New Testament that Jesus says, "Take up a sword and slaughter on my behalf."
No, absolutely. I mean, you're absolutely right. So Christianity always has this tension. The military orders particularly have this tension because Christianity is, a very pacifistic religion. Jesus is the Prince of Peace. The whole point of the thing is love, and and so on. And the church has always espoused that. The trouble is that in the material world, in the real world, if you have a community that's under threat and people invade, so the Christian territories in the Middle East, the Middle East was almost entirely Christian when the Muslims invaded in the 7th century and then again in the 11th century. If you're going to defend your own people, if you're going to defend Christianity, you can talk to the invader and you can have an interesting discussion. But ultimately, if violence is done against you, many in Christianity thought that you needed to defend yourself. So there were always two schools of thought. One which is very pacifistic, and you still see that in things like Quakerism and Methodism in the modern world. But on the other hand, there are large parts of mainstream Christianity who would say that aggressive warfare is wrong, but that the religion and the community needs to be able to defend itself. And the military orders, the Templars, always had that as their standing orders. They were not supposed to be aggressive. There was no forcible conversion. Their role was to defend Christian lands rather than to go out and be unpleasant to other people.
And who are these? We're told that there were 9 knights. I've got to say, the story that is told by people like Wiliam of Tyre and Walter Map, it's got a bit of Robin Hood and his merry men kind of about it. But we're told there's 9 knights, and over the first 9 years, they don't really seem to grow very much. But who are these 9 knights? I mean, we know Hugh de Payne. One of them's called Gondomar. We don't know anything, seems to know much about him at all. But
great name, though.
Good name.
Yeah.
And but they all seem to come from the Champagne region of France. There may have been interconnections. But in your view, who the hell are these guys?
Yeah, well, you're right. I mean, these are legendary characters, or semi-legendary, and with semi-legendary origin stories. I think the two main possibilities are that they were guys who were part of that flotsam from the First Crusade. Guys who were very pious, came over from Europe, may have been part of the same group if they've got this kind of Champagne geographical link to them, and stayed behind afterwards. And they seem to have been kind of almost like bouncers. They were the kind of security squad for the Holy Sepulchre, because the First Crusade had uncovered a lot of wonderful relics and holy items, and they needed to be housed somewhere. The other key thing they had to do was guard the roads. So they're basically, a police force as well as a bouncer squad. And these handful of men would patrol the road from Jaffa, which is the only port that the Crusaders owned at that time in the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem at the very, very early stages, to make sure that pilgrims could travel up that hyper dangerous road into Jerusalem and to worship at the Holy Sepulchre. Or they may have come along a little bit later. There were other crusaders coming in 1102, 1103, and they may have been guys from that. But they were a tiny number of enthusiasts, really, volunteers living off scraps, being given second-hand clothes. You're talking a very embryonic start to what became a very rich and powerful organisation.
And you mentioned there the pilgrims who, I mean, there's always been pilgrims going to Jerusalem, even when it was under Muslim control after the 7th century. But as you say, that a lot of Christians in Europe must have thought, whoopee, Jerusalem's back under Christian control. It would be so easy and safe to go to Jerusalem, and they come a cropper on the roads in. And what we're essentially told is that the Templars were set up as a kind of, kind of pilgrim security force, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they're tiny numbers of people, but we have surviving accounts of what it was like to walk up that road, and we tend to think of Walter Scott and how lovely and colourful the Crusades were, and in fact, I don't think that was ever true, but particularly in the early years, it was more like Mad Max. This is kind of dystopian horror. Walking up that road, it would take you about 2 days, and people were tired. It's that classic combination, that people were very vulnerable because they were tired, they were disorientated, they poorly armed, but everyone also knew they had ready cash with them because they're pilgrims, so they've got to carry cash. There's no traveller's checks. And so they're incredibly vulnerable. And we know from accounts of Englishmen like Seawolf, who walked up that road in the early couple of years of the Crusader states. They were walking past bodies on the side of the road, skeletons, rotting skeletons, and nobody could stop. Everyone was too scared to stop and bury them, which was a great source of, pain to people. But even if your own friends died, you either buried them, in which case you died with them, or you just kept on moving. It was real march or die.
And so you've got them looking after pilgrims, but you've also got them. They must have provided some kind of internal security service for these kingdoms. I mean, they were pretty volatile. There must have been a population that really didn't want to be ruled by these crusaders. I mean, some people collaborated, some people didn't want that. And then in addition, they're also fighting the external enemy, the enemy at the gate, the Fatimids or Seljuks or whatever. So they're really coming into play on all fronts very quickly.
Oh my word, yes. And I think the mistake that's easy to make is to see them as they became rather than what they were. And there's a kind of Darwinistic approach. We see the survivors. And in fact, the contemporary sources for the Templars are almost non-existent. And it's not because they didn't become famous, but it was because at the time, I suspect there were lots of little groups like that, that didn't grow up to become the Templars, but there was one group that did under Hugh of Pain. And as we know, there were some groups that did grow and prosper and then were snuffed out, like, the confraternity of St. Peter, who died at Angus Sanguinus. And ironically, and I'm sure it's not a coincidence, they died in the same year that the Templars were set up. I think people realised that they were a good thing.
Yeah.
It's a great idea. But that particular order was just snuffed out in one afternoon.
And of course, what we know about the Templars is it's the first Grand Master who really starts setting up this network of agri-businesses, as I like to call them, preceptories and commanderies. I mean, he kind of works out the business plan pretty quickly. It becomes very effective in terms of channeling money to the front line. He gets royal patrons to back him, nobles handing over scrubby bits of land, but it's all, it all adds to the... So they've got the model pretty quickly, and they also seem to inspire quite a lot of hatred quite quickly as well, especially from clerics who think, shouldn't that money be going to us?
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, I would love, the old "who would you have at your dinner party" sort of question. I would, Hugh de Payne would be fantastic, but he must have been so charismatic because he was able to wander around and sell the idea, and single-handedly in a few months he transformed the Templars from a group of the bouncers of the Holy Sepulchre into an international, papally endorsed, structured group of men, and he inspired generations of West European knights to come and volunteer and to have a place that they could go and fight, and at the same time do devout things in the Holy Land. So he was a transformative character.
I mean, I guess the question that still crosses my mind is, what on earth was appealing about this? I mean, you're asking testosterone-charged medieval males to give up all the fun things of life, including women, and to go and join this very Spartan organisation. It's all military drills, and of course, they pray as often as monks, crack of dawn through to last thing at night. How on earth was this attractive?
I know, it's not Club 1830, is it? I mean, plus you've got the added frisson of almost certain death. I mean, most, the casualty rates here, I mean, there must have been like, a German U-boat squad life expectancy. I mean, a lot of the guys, there's a big churn, particularly after, you lose a battle. You quite often find half of the Templars just never appear again. You never see the same Turcopole or commander of the different parts of the group. So I think the key to it is devotion. There's a level of piety across the world that we just don't see now. It's true in the Muslim world, it's true in the Christian world. They have a level of piety that even if you and I go to mass every week, Tony, which I'm sure we do, you can never replicate.
Only if it's the Latin rite.
Of course, I know. Tridentine.
I'm very
Tridentine. But we're nowhere near that. I mean, these guys were profoundly pious. Also, they were brought up in a society where their only justification for being elite was being profoundly good at weapon skills, and they were great military figures and great religious figures. So, I think the trick that Hugh and the Templars did was to lean into that, and they allowed the merging of those two key features of the ruling elite, and it was the testosterone that made people want to do that.
Ever wanted to know more about the history of the Knights Templar, from their origins through to the end, and a few of the conspiracy theories in between? Then buy the Knights Templar History and Mystery by Tony McMahon. It's available on Amazon, Waterstones, and other outlets. Buy it to get a comprehensive look at the Knights Templar. Was there also a status thing? I mean, if you were a local lad who went off to join the Templars, were you immediately a hero? No doubt some of the ladies trying to convince you not to go. And
that would have been awful, wouldn't it?
Well,
yeah.
it would have been, yes.
Yeah.
But I mean, what was the kind of... And also, of course, I suppose the opportunity to travel, although I understand you couldn't automatically assume you're going to be sent to the Holy Land. You might be sent to, the backwater of wherever. But yeah, I mean, it's join the Templars, travel,
see Templar
the world.
Yes. See Gloucestershire. No, you're absolutely right. I think there was all that. I think it was a kind of... it's like James Bond. Men want to be them, women want them. It's that whole kind of thing. And there was a status. So you're taking high status, relatively high status or middling status, competitive young males who are pious and testosterone filled, and you're giving them this additional kicker that they can find purpose in their lives and the admiration of their families and the people around them. It's a very compelling mixture.
So now it's time to go down a conspiracy rabbit hole.
Go on.
So, I mean, let's start with, they're called the Templars. And the reason they're called the Templars is they're based on the Temple Mount. Now, some people have read a lot of significance into this. They are given, as it were, quarters in what's now the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which had been a Muslim place of worship, would become one again, but at that point was called the Temple of Solomon. What significance do you read into this, and were they digging for treasure underneath
obviously
the Temple of Solomon?
Obviously. Yeah, no, I don't read a lot of significance into it. I mean, they're in Jerusalem, obviously there is significance there, but it actually wasn't their first headquarters. That it was their second home that was given to them by the King of Jerusalem, because he'd found somewhere better to move to. I mean, I think it's a very prosaic thing about where are we going to put this group of young men who we need to have stationed in Jerusalem, because the Holy Sepulchre is there, the pilgrims are coming there, and it's it's the capital city of the kingdom. So I've never come across any evidence of the guys getting JCBs in at midnight to start digging up the Ark of the Covenant or what have you. I mean, that is... There are lots of reasons why people would like that to have happened. There's a lot of groups nowadays, Freemasons or other groups, who want to have a backstory, and the Templars are wonderful for that, because they're posh, they're butch, they've also got hints of magic and the arcane about them. That kind of the tripartite set of qualities is hugely powerful for somebody who wants to create a kind of conspiratorial backstory. But I've looked at what I think is pretty much all the contemporary evidence, or even later medieval evidence, and it's just not there.
Oh, of course we have as well. We've got to touch on this while we're down the rabbit hole, as it were. We have this whole idea as well from being set up by a pre-existing clandestine organisation. Some people have called it the Priory of Sion, which of course is a theory that I've written about in one of my books. I know you've studied as well, and it has been comprehensively debunked, but that didn't stop Dan Brown making a stupendous amount of money, which he deserved, by the way, in case his lawyers are watching, with the
Very
Da
much
Vinci
so,
Code.
yes.
But it's and we have another theory, I think, called the Rex Deus theory, very similar as well. But I think you would rule out the idea of a pre-existing organisation setting up the Templars as their military wing. The Templars finish, and this pre-existing organisation continues to the present day, running the world,
Clearly,
etc.
Yes. No, I think, in fairness to dear Dan Brown, I mean, he's writing fiction. I mean, fair dues. They're great stories, but he's not pretending they're anything other than stories. And I think the danger is that people do read far too much into this thing. There is a slight grain of truth in as much as the Hospitallers, who were the rivals to the Hospitallers, to the Templars, and they became another military order, one of the two primary military orders for most of the Crusades. They did actually have a prior history. Their backstory was, but it was much less military. It wasn't conspiratorial. A couple of their guys used to run a hospital in Jerusalem before the Crusades.
And they've gone back to doing that, basically.
And they're now handing out oranges at football matches, which is a great thing, and running eye hospitals and doing.
We met them at the Battle of
works.
Evesham Festival, I think, recently.
Indeed, they were all there. Yes.
Yeah. Yes. But I mean, I think that. So we'll discount that. So we won't run ahead of ourselves because we'll stop it. I think at this point. But I think we're agreed that they were a group of knights who they met a need for, as you said, a standing army at that particular point, and they instilled a kind of ethos into their recruits that made it easier for them to stay put and to commit to the cause.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a very powerful kind of recruiting sergeant at a time when young men were needed to go out and defend the Christian communities of the Middle East.
Steve, basically going to stop there. That's our look then at the origins of the Knights Templar. Now, you may not agree with everything we've said. You may think that we've been too dismissive about our friends in the Priory of Sion. My apologies to them if they're tuning in, and or Rex Deus or whatever. But more importantly, the medieval roots of the Templars. You may have your own views on why they were so successful, how they got so rich, why they were showered with privileges and so on. Future episode, we're going to look at why they were crushed 200 years later, which has some object lessons. But for now, we've got to say a fond farewell, but do join us for the next episode. So goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
And non nobis domine.